From Kendall Square, this is the Pulse Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Fang Xie.
And I'm your other co-host, Yosef Baidi. Together, we dive deep into biotech stories and feature biotech leaders. This podcast is brought to you by the GSAS Harvard Biotech Club, a trainee-led Harvard biotech organization which is on a mission to bridge the gap between academia and industry.
We're happy to have our new staff writer, Jennifer Zhang, join us to co-host.
Thank you for the introduction. Today's guest is Dr. John Maraganore. John is a founding CEO of Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, where he led for nearly 20 years and pioneered RNA interference therapeutics. Under his leadership, Alnylam grew from a startup into one of the most influential biotech companies, delivering the first FDA-approved RNAi therapy in 2018 and creating an entirely new class of medicines. John's career spans both science and business. He is a UChicago-trained PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, as well as former leader at Millennium and Biogen. He now focuses on venture creation and as an investor and advisor. He also sits on boards of several pharmaceutical companies. Beyond company building, John has strong mentorship and ecosystem footprint. He serves as one of the advisors for a club and launched a fellows program at UMass Chan's RNA Therapeutics Institute. In short, through capital, company stewardship, and structured mentoring, he helps founders and scientists grow. So we're very thrilled to welcome John to the show and to hear his insights on biotech innovation, entrepreneurship, and the future of medicine. Welcome, John.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to join you guys today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. We can start with the first question. Can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and what led you to be interested in science early on in your life?
So I grew up in Chicago in the start. I was born in '62, so I've been around for a little bit of time. But grew up with Greek immigrant parents. My mom and dad came to this country, and with very little money and with a big dream of building a life, in this great country, and so obviously very proud of my Greek heritage and so forth. But I was blessed in growing up. My mother gave me an important gift. She gave me a gift of optimism, and so I'm generally a very optimistic person, which turns out to be a very useful characteristic if you're going to ultimately be a CEO. I didn't know that at the time, but I've learned that since. And then my father gave me the gift of a passion for science. He was a physician. He really loved medicine. His love of medicine and science ended up creating for me this drive to do something in the sciences and in the medical field. And that was really pretty important in my upbringing. I mean, I was a bit of a nerd, I would say, growing up. I grew up in a near north suburb of Chicago called Skokie. Didn't do anything too crazy as a kid. I mean, I had some fun, but not too much. But went to the University of Chicago for college and fell in love with research at Chicago. And I stayed at Chicago to get my master's degree and my PhD, which I managed to get pretty quickly in my life for lots of interesting reasons. But from there, was able to go into the pharma industry. I did a postdoc at the Upjohn Company, which is now part of Pfizer, and from there started my career in biotech.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks so much for telling about your upbringing. I got interested in doing a PhD. So I guess you were kind of interested in science. Was there some maybe moment or impact in sort of deciding between like maybe an MD or a PhD? Like, how do you decide that educational path?
Well, my dad wanted me to be an MD, mm-hmm. and as a physician, he was hell bent on having both of his sons becoming MDs. My brother fulfilled his dreams and became a neurologist, but I deviated, and which often happens with middle children, as I was, and I became passionate about doing scientific research. When I was at Chicago, starting my sophomore year, I joined a lab as a lab assistant, lab tech, doing research, working with some of the PhD grad students and postdocs that were in the lab, doing protein structure function work and, doing work on snake venom phospholipases. And I fell in love with being in the lab. I enjoyed it. I felt that every day I was doing research, I was doing something nobody was doing in the world. And there was that real feeling of exploration, that feeling of new discovery that I think accompanies the passion and characteristic of just about anybody who's doing lab research around the world. So it was, for me, it was something that was truly exciting. I would spend time between classes to go in the lab and get an experiment set up, or after classes go and do a few experiments before going to the library to study. So it became part of my daily grind, if you will, but I loved it. It was just so much fun, and that drove me to make the decision to go down a PhD path versus an MD path at the end of the day.
And later on, even though your PhD wasn't mainly focusing on RNA biology, when did RNA and gene silencing come into your radar, and what made it compelling to you?
Well, actually, my most of my graduate work and my early scientific work was on proteins and peptides, not on RNA. My transition to RNA actually formally occurred when I became the CEO of Alnylam in 2002. I mean, I was obviously familiar with what was going on in the RNA therapies world with antisense oligos and companies like Ionis Pharmaceuticals, that at the time was called ISIS Pharmaceuticals, and also some other RNA players out there. But for the most part, my time to become a leader or get more involved in nucleic acid-based medicines was much later in my career, 2002.
Oh, thanks for sharing more about that. And then after you did your PhD, you made the jump to industry
I did.
Right away. So what was that decision like to go that path as opposed to continuing on the academia path?
My initial plan was to be an academic scientist. Back in the early 80s, mid 80s, it was pretty unusual for somebody to go into industry. It's not like today. Really was viewed as being sort of a selling out moment if you went to the quote unquote dark side. Although at the time, it was the beginning time of biotech, and I was fascinated by what was going on in the biotech arena. I mean, there was, Genentech had been started, Biogen had been started. There was a lot of even lay press coverage of recombinant DNA work and how it could transform the future of medicine. So I was intrigued by all that, but my original plan really was to be an academic scientist. But my thesis advisor at the University of Chicago ended up getting recruited to go be a staff scientist, a lead scientist at the Upjohn Company. And when he went there, and I finished up my grad work at Chicago, he invited me to come over and do a postdoc with him and just sort of finish up some unfinished lab work that we had been scheming about. And I took him up on the offer. And, in that 1 year I spent at Upjohn, I became excited about biotech type and pharmaceutical type research, because unlike academic training where you are, very, very focused on one specific topic and subject, and you publish on that work and you're the world's expert on that piece of research, in a biotech pharma environment, it's much more of a team sport. You're working with many different people, and you're thinking about how your work can ultimately become important as medicines. And I felt both the team aspect of a pharma biotech experience, but also the application of that experience for medicine and for patients was invigorating. And that was the change point. It was about 1986 that happened in my life, and from that point on, I've been in the biotech industry.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's like once you kind of move to the other side, I hear a lot of people are like, I'm not going back.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not like you get exsanguinated of your scientific interest by going into industry. In fact, I think some of the science that's done in industry is about the best in the world. And obviously the funding is very robust, depending on the environment, of course. But it can be very positive in that way. So I found it to be very exciting and very scientifically challenging as well.
So where's Alnylam name from? Alnylam. Yeah, tell us. Is
Well,
name
Alnylam.
It's
No, it's Arabic actually. Yeah, the name Alnylam, which was coined before I joined the company, so I inherited the name, but the name Alnylam is Arabic for string of pearls. Okay. And it was also the name of the center star of Orion's belt. So if you look at the constellation Orion and the three stars that go across, the center star is Alnylam. And Paul Schimmel, one of our founders, Paul Schimmel, he coined the name. His aunt was his favorite aunt was an Arab scholar, and in a nod to her, as sort of a sign of respect to her, he suggested the name Alnylam would be good for the company, in part because string of pearls is an interesting analogy to a string of nucleic acids in the RNA molecule. And so that's where the name Alnylam came from. And I loved it. It takes people a while when they don't know the company name to sort of look at it and understand how to pronounce it, but it's a great name.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely unique. I feel like I see a lot of companies that have like Greek sounding names, like Delphia, or like those. So it's good to just change it up a bit.
It is actually the name of the company before it got changed to Alnylam was City Therapeutics, which is a completely blasé, who cares name, and I'm so happy that Paul renamed it Alnylam Pharmaceuticals for sure.
Can you tell us a bit more about the beginning of your journey founding Alnylam, some of the challenges, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I joined Alnylam as the founding CEO in December of 2002. The company was started on the big, bold vision of harnessing the RNAi pathway that had just been discovered in cells. I mean, it was 1998 that Fire and Mello described their seminal work that led to their Nobel Prize in 2006. But it was very, very new, RNAi at the time. And what we had a vision for is that if we can harness the RNAi pathway in cells and silence genes at the level of mRNA, we could effectively create a whole new class of medicines. So it was a big, bold vision. It was based on incredibly exciting, newly discovered science. And at Alnylam, our challenge was to figure out how to make drugs out of the small interfering RNA molecules, siRNA molecules, that are the molecules that mediate RNAi. And it turns out it was really hard. I mean, we had a lot to figure out, over many, many years of doing a lot of science. And of course, the biggest challenge was figuring out how to get these small interfering RNA molecules from the outside of the cell into the inside of the cell, specifically in the cytoplasm, where they could harness the RNAi machinery to silence an mRNA. And that took a lot of work, almost a decade of work, before we really had solutions that were acceptable for human testing at the end.
Yeah, I know you had been in Alnylam for a while. I know there's challenges with starting companies where it's you have to figure out, or the goal of the company is to show scientifically things are going well, and at some point you guys have to go to getting a therapy in the market and finances. Was that kind of a challenge to think about, but someone with a mostly scientist background?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, we started the company as a venture-backed company, like most biotech companies get started, and we went public in 2004. And look, I had the one thing that's I think important to mention is I had about 20 years of experience in biotech companies before I started as CEO of Alnylam. I mean, that's really, really important. I try to tell people, young people especially, who are really eager to go into a CEO role real quickly, I'm like, wait a second. I mean, you've got a lot to learn, and because it's a very complicated industry. So how do you raise money? How do you do clinical trials? How do you think about manufacturing your drugs? How do you think about going public or staying private, this, not the other. These are all really hard things that you just don't, there's no book that says, here's what you do. So you got to live it. And so I did 20 years of time at Biogen and Millennium before I ultimately became CEO of Alnylam. And, look, I think that the prior 20-year experience was critical to basically be ready to be a leader of a company as a CEO. And so that put me in a good position to think about, all right, when do we raise money? When do we go public? When do we have to bring our first drug to the clinic, and so forth and so on? So that experience was helpful.
So would you say for trainees who want to pursue entrepreneurship or want to found their own companies, they should wait a bit, have more industry experience?
Absolutely. Huge proponent of industry experience. And I would say this, Jen, I think the young entrepreneur, recently minted scientist or business leader, they should go to a more established biotech company like an Alnylam, like a Biogen, like a Vertex, if they're in the Cambridge area, or like on the West Coast, there are a lot of great companies, BioMarin, amongst others, and they should learn in those companies from very experienced, very successful leaders, and soak it in. It's sort of like, think of it as your postdoc before you go and you try to do something more entrepreneurial, more at the startup stage. And definitely get that experience before you're in a leadership role in a newly minted company. I mean, for sure. So that's my vote. A lot of younger people these days seem very eager to go into being the CEO right away. That may work in the tech industry. Where you've got so many examples of very successful recently minted graduates going into tech leadership roles, but it doesn't work that great in biotech, unfortunately. It just takes a little bit more experience. It's more complicated.
Yeah. But your experience, what type of role you think the postdoc, whatever, grad students, when they join industry, but they have idea, maybe in the future, I may want to try this at some point. What type of role they should take, or specifically to learn in those established companies?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first role could be as a scientist within those companies. And when you join a company, especially a larger biotech company, as a scientist, you get exposed to a lot of things. You see a lot of what's going on in the company. But then what I always tell people, they have multiple different paths they can go down if they want to get a little bit of business experience. So they can go into being a program manager or program leader, or they can go into business development. And get skills in sort of the entirety of the efforts that go on in a biotech company. And those are the sort of steps from a career standpoint that would be really good if somebody wants to go from being a scientist to being a business leader at the end of the day. So program management, program leadership, business development, alliance management, those are all roles that are really good if you want to transition into the business side of it. But, you can go from being a great scientist and academic research and become the head of R&D someplace as a leader over time once you learn and demonstrate success and so forth. So, but, it takes time, and people need to take the time to do it.
I guess specifically after the student or postdoc gain some experience in the industry,
yes,
are there specific actions that you recommend them take once they want to be a founder or entrepreneur? In their first few years, what are some of the actions that you think they should take?
Well, I mean, I think obviously if they want to be a founder, that means that they've got to come up with some good ideas of a piece of science to pursue. They, in the course of doing their experience, gaining, time in a biotech company, they should stay in close touch with, academic leaders and academic scientists to see what other ideas might be out there. They should be very active in networking. I mean, I'm a huge fan of people interacting in a community so that they stay in close touch with what other people are doing. And I think it's an important part of career development is to maintain a very, very active network. And I've always done that in my life and encourage other people to do it as well. But I think if somebody who's in a career growth mode, learning in a biotech company, ultimately wants to go run their own or start up their own company, they need to really stay in close touch with people on the science side, but also begin to develop relationships with people that have the money. So learning about the venture community, networking with people that are in the venture side, getting that exposure is super important as well.
Okay.
How would you advise founders to handle failure?
Yeah. Well, I mean, failure, as Friedrich Nietzsche says, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I think failure ought to be a learning. It ought to be something which, you bounce back from. You learn from it. You become stronger. You become better. Bounce back from it and go do it again. But you also can minimize the failure rates when you have a lot of experience. And that gets back to the earlier point about making sure that, the founder entrepreneur is not somebody who's necessarily just out of grad school or out of high school or out of kindergarten, but somebody who might have actually had a career in a biotech company, learning what the business is all about. And I think that's super important.
It's not like a technology garage. It's a garage mode, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, very different. Very, very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely good advice. And I know from your decades of experience in industry, you've obviously held a lot of leadership positions in different companies. So you could tell us a little bit about, you have to make a lot of big decisions when you're high up in leadership. So what does that look like? And, can you maybe give examples of, decisions to make when you have to pivot for a company or, say you want to go full steam ahead on maybe something you're really excited about as a company?
Yeah. I mean, I've had that experience way too many times, I have to say. I think decision making is making high quality decisions without delaying them too much, by doing them relatively quickly, is something I believe in strongly. I think too many. I've always told people I'd rather make a decision today with 80% knowledge than wait for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get to that elusive 99.9% knowledge level on a decision. And I think that's because I think sometimes, especially in entrepreneurship and business building, you have to take some risks. You can't just have 100% certainty. In fact, I don't think you can ever have 100% certainty in what we do as a business. So you have to be willing to take those risks, make those decisions quickly. We had many during the time we built Alnylam over 20 years, that I was leading it. We had many, many points in time where we had to make key decisions. And the decisions were, true paths in the road where go down one, you'll have a completely different, set of outcomes versus the other. Whether it was, what programs to put into the clinic, which ones to stop. Those are some of the most important decisions. When to go public versus stay private. When we made that decision in 2004, that was an important decision. Do a partnership with a major pharma company or not. Work with this partner versus that partner. Many examples during my time leading Alnylam where we had to do that. But as always, you want to make decisions in a data-driven way, in a science-based manner. You want to get input from people. I'm a big believer that most decisions should be made together with other colleagues. But sometimes the CEO needs to make the final call. And there were several examples of that as well. But it's always best when it's done with a group where there's good alignment, good consensus around what to do.
Yeah. That's actually a good point, deciding as a group, but then there's always one person that makes the decision. Is there a lot of cases where there could be disagreement? Maybe CEO really feels one way, but the board feels another way. And how do you see that usually happens where that gets resolved?
Yeah, I mean, the board level, the board is the CEO's boss, essentially. So, that does require getting consensus with your board and getting alignment with your board. But that almost always happens. With your team, it's more frequent that there are some levels of disagreements or misalignment. Maybe, a couple people on the team want to go one direction, other people on the team want to go another direction, and the CEO has to play Solomon and basically make that choice, or help make that choice at the end of the day. And look, my view is, unless that decision is somehow political or capricious or unfounded by science and facts, once that decision is made, everybody needs to align behind it, and they always do, or they should always do, and that's important at the end. But there are many examples. I mean, I can give you specific examples, but probably too detailed to get into here. But many examples where ultimately the CEO has to make a final call on something at the end.
A very naive question is like the dictatorship and versus democracy, something like that. Or,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I would call it. It's not a democracy. I mean, leadership of a company can't be a democracy because you just no one person has all the information in a way that allows them to make the right decision. So ultimately, you need to have sort of an individual leader who can make the final call. But again, 99% of the time it's done with strong consensus by the team.
Okay.
At the end.
Cool.
So you just talked about you have to make a series of tough decisions. For example, shutting down a program. What signals tells you that some of these tough decisions will translate into better outcomes later?
I mean, it's really clear. I mean, for one, if you need to shut down a program, I mean, I'll give you some examples of programs that we had to shut down and why. We had a program that we were developing in a liver cancer indication, and it had some interesting and I'd say encouraging data, but nothing that was blow-away data early on. And then we had a resource allocation-based decision to make. We could have continued that program and continued investing millions of dollars in it and putting lots of people behind it, or we could have pivoted our dollars and our people to a set of programs that were much more compelling at the end of the day, namely the TTR programs at Alnylam. And we made that decision very clearly, walking away from something that was in the clinic that had some promising data, but nothing, nothing blow away, to basically go after this other space that we thought could be an unbelievable new therapy. And that was the right decision, right? That's a good example. Other times your decision-making on stopping a program is not really something that's negotiable. We had a program that was in phase 3 development, and it ended up having a safety liability in humans where, in a placebo-controlled trial, more patients receiving the drug were dying than patients that were receiving placebo. Well, that's a problem. And that's not even a minute's thought. That's an issue of toxicity. Patients always come first, and you make the decision to stop that program. Okay, so multiple sort of stop program, reinvest effort in different programs, or God forbid, as can happen, there's a safety issue in a program, and you just have to stop it for patients.
So the work that you did in Alnylam sounds very exciting. So where you did all those programs, you served as the founding CEO for 20 years. What motivated your shift from leading an established pharmaceutical company to venture creation, recently founding Corsera Health and City Therapeutics?
Yeah, I mean, I loved being the CEO of Alnylam, and it was a great pleasure. But I did it for 20 years, and it was time to pass the baton in that organization to a terrific leader, Yvonne Greenstreet, who's my successor there, and doing a great job. So I wanted to basically stop being an operating leader, is what I call it, where you're the person who, like I was at Alnylam, where you're the proverbial man in the arena, to use the Teddy Roosevelt quote, where the buck stops with you. You've got all the accountability on your back, all the responsibility, and all the sleepless nights that you have to take on, and basically go into a mode where I can be, at a higher elevation of involvement with companies, as opposed to being in the weeds with one company, but be at a higher elevation with a larger number of companies and basically be a multiplier of innovation. When I was leading Alnylam, I was all in 24/7 Alnylam and RNAi therapeutics. And now, I've got a large number of different efforts that I help, in some capacity, either as a board member, either as a venture advisor, or as a chairman, executive chairman. So there's many ways in which I'm getting involved, but I don't have that ultimate, 24/7 accountability on my back anymore. So it allows me to be more involved with a larger number of things. I call it, my wife doesn't like this analogy, but I'll use it anyway. I call it being in the grandfather phase, and I'm not actually a grandfather, although my kids could help me get there. But it's when you're a grandparent, you have, I'm told, you can have a blast with the grandkids. But when there's shit in the diaper, you just give the kid back to the parents. Okay, and I think to me that's the best analogy here for where I want to be in my life. But look, I find it great. You can help a lot of people with their efforts, and it's really rewarding to see these multiple efforts succeed over time.
That's like a perfect analogy. And I think in addition to with all these startup companies and boards, I know you're kind of like a mentor for a lot of people. Yeah. I know some people could describe it as like an elder statesman of biotech. Yeah. So is that something you kind of really got into, or is this people have been asking you for advice and you've just been advising people at this point?
I've had in my career I've been blessed with working with and learning from some great people. I mean, one of my great mentors in my career was Mark Levin, who is the CEO of Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Mark is an amazing leader, and what I learned from Mark is you should talk to everybody. Mark would literally, regardless of who it was and whatever, he would drive. He would go out of his way to meet with people, talk to people, and I sort of ascribe to the same philosophy. I'm very happy to meet with people, talk to people about whatever subject, their careers, their science, their ideas, their dreams, whatever the case might be. So that's one thing I believe in. The other thing I believe in is that you're only as good as the next generation of leaders, or the future is only as good as the next generation of leaders that will drive it. And that's why I think it's so important to mentor that next generation. So I do that with a number of different groups. I do it with Nucleate. I do it with the Tremere Institute. And I learned a lot of this, speaking of Tremere, I learned a lot of this from Henry Tremere, who was a consummate, amazing leader, but also somebody who would always mentor young leaders in the industry, including myself. And so I think giving back to the community in that type of mode, I think is really important and something which I enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's really great that you could pay it forward.
Yeah, it's pay forward, and also really just help the broader efforts of what we do in bringing science to patients at the end of the day by helping a large group of young leaders make that happen.
So going back to the new companies that you have founded, do you have any sort of near-death moments that you can share? For example,
near-death moments.
During your venture creation, were there any moments where you look back and kind of thought oh, I'm really glad we went this way instead of another?
It's been too short of a period, I would say. I mean, I've only been doing this part. I left Alnylam at the end of 21, so this has only been, 4 years into this journey. But no, I mean, I've been involved in starting up a number of companies right now, and I really, really enjoy it. I mean, some of the companies I helped found are Orbital Therapeutics, which is focused on RNA-based therapies, City Therapeutics, which is focused on next-generation RNAi, and then a brand new company called Corsera Health, which is focused on cardiovascular prevention. I wouldn't say there's any yet. There aren't any near-death moments for any of them. But there have been certainly important, decisions that have had to get made, and efforts around, and mostly I would have to say at those stages of a company, it's mostly around the people side of it. Do I hire this person or that person, and do I, And sometimes we're on the money side of it. Do we, do we raise this much money or that much money? Those type of decisions. Those are all important things to get right. But none of them what I would call a near-death moment yet. We had plenty of near-death moments in Alnylam, but that was over 20 years. So it takes a little bit longer to get to those juncture points.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm happy avoiding them altogether. That'd be fine.
Okay.
Interesting point. So you have some newer companies now focused on RNA as a therapeutic modality.
Yeah.
Like, how would you say, starting those companies differs compared to Alnylam? Because I imagine there was like more skepticism maybe in the beginning as RNA as a modality before. Is it easier or different now?
Yeah, I mean, look, in some ways, much easier as it relates to RNA as a therapeutic approach. I mean, obviously, the work that we did at Alnylam paved the way for the future of many innovations on RNA-based therapies, and so we sort of stand on the shoulders of giants. At the end of the day, I mean, Alnylam is just such an amazing story, and will continue to be one of the top companies in the biotech space, which is fantastic. But there are opportunities for innovation, more innovation to emerge. And a lot of times that new innovation has to emerge out of smaller efforts. Sometimes the larger companies have got many gods to please, many things that they have to get done, along financial requirements and so forth. And sometimes it's hard to do that sort of risky earlier stage initiative, and that's why these smaller companies can sometimes pave the way for some new future innovation at the end, and that's what some of these new companies I'm helping start are really looking at. They're looking at the next wave of innovation. Some of them will I'm sure be super successful in doing what they do. Others might get acquired by larger companies, including Alnylam. So these are all parts of a life cycle of building a company. At the end of the day, but Alnylam, of course, will always be a top company in the space and has led the way. Thanks to the efforts that we had over the 20-year period I was there to really build something that was going to be lasting at the end.
That's a good point about the new companies being able to do more and maybe be more innovative. And
yeah,
Jennifer had asked a little bit about Corsera before, and that's really exciting because you mentioned about cardiovascular disease prevention. I know we have some good treatments for it, like statins, and there's a lot of excitement over PCSK9. Have you guys seen some growth in that area that you're okay, we should go into? What was their kind of rationale for starting this company?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm super excited about this company because it could actually be the most important thing I've ever done, believe it or not. Just because of the fact that we're trying to really bend the curve on cardiovascular morbidity and mortality in the world. And the public health implications of what we're trying to do at Corsera Health could, really change medicine. And that's exciting. So it is focused on cardiovascular prevention using RNAi as a preventative tool, preventative medicine, and giving it once a year. RNAi therapeutics are remarkably durable, and we believe that a drug that targets both PCSK9 for cholesterol, but also angiotensinogen for blood pressure, given once a year as a co-mixture, if you will, of those two RNAi therapeutics, can be profoundly important for public health if it's given to people relatively younger in life than where current treatments are given. And the reason for that is that, atherosclerosis is a disease of cumulative exposure to elevated LDL cholesterol. And other cardiovascular morbidity is due to a cumulative exposure of elevated blood pressure. And so if we can lower both LDL and blood pressure earlier in life, 30s and 40s, and allow a person to effectively live a full life from a health span perspective without cardiovascular disease, that would be amazing. Right now, unfortunately, we just treat heart attacks when they happen or treat strokes when they happen, and we ought to be thinking about how to prevent them from happening in the first place, especially when we know what causes them.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I guess it's very much like a shifting paradigm, like
It
you
is.
said. Yeah.
A total paradigm shift. Total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I think the therapeutics that you're developing are really important, but maybe a controversial topic. So there's some recent funding cuts to RNA therapeutics. What are your thoughts on that? How are you dealing with this? Do you think there's a bounce back later on?
Yeah, I mean, the funding cuts to RNA therapies is really around RNA vaccines, and sort of the unfortunate political situation that has, I think, unfortunately, created a backlash against those efforts. I mean, I actually think mRNA vaccines are a remarkable innovation. They saved us from the pandemic, and in his first administration, Operation Warp Speed was the creation of these vaccines in record time, and it was a huge accomplishment, to say the least. So it's a little bit sad to see this sort of recoiling against mRNA vaccines by some members of the current administration, and I think it's unfounded scientifically. But this too shall turn around. I'm not worried about anything sustained in that regard. I think ultimately the science will win, and it will happen here as well.
Yeah. And imagine, as like someone, you've been in the industry for a while, you always see like the peaks and valleys. So I imagine that's something you don't worry about as much, because there's always going to be like a recovery.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen lots of cycles over the 40 years I've been doing biotech, and both financial cycles, but also, cycles of sentiment as it relates to the science.
So someone is like a little bit critical to this field, I have to say. So a little bit challenging. I want to we will also want to challenge you. Okay. So what would you be your bold guess on the mRNA therapeutics? For example, 5 years for mRNA therapeutics, mRNA vaccine in solid tumor. I mean, overall, we want to hear your insights.
Well, I think look, we can talk about RNA therapies and then mRNA vaccine-based therapies. I mean, mRNA vaccine-based therapies are going to be really important for infectious disease. I think the work that's being done to generate personalized cancer vaccines, I think, is super promising. But there's a lot of work there still to be done, and I think the verdict is still out as to whether or not it'll be ultimately plausible and feasible and effective. I mean, I don't think anybody worries about the safety. I think it's mostly on the effectiveness. So, let's see how that goes. I mean, it's still early days, I think, for cancer vaccines. For RNA therapies, small RNA therapies like siRNAs, I think the world is going to see an explosion of new therapies that emerge with that approach. There's 7 drugs that have been approved right now that are RNAi therapeutics. There are dozens of RNAi therapeutic drugs in clinical development right now. And so I think RNAi as an approach will rival monoclonal antibodies in the future as the top category of medicine. There are over 120 monoclonal antibodies that are now approved, and over 60% of pharmaceutical revenues come from monoclonal antibodies. And I think in the future we'll see a similar story emerge for RNAi therapies from companies like Alnylam and City Therapeutics and Corsera and other companies I'm helping build. So that's exciting.
But what's bottleneck you can imagine?
What's that? I'm sorry?
Bottlenecks. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the bottlenecks, mostly are money, I would say. I mean, I think that the capital markets, right now it's a very difficult time from a capital market perspective. I think that'll recover in due course, but it's certainly been a more challenging time right now. The other side of it is people, great people with experience. That's a limiting factor too. There's only so many people you can find that are really great people, at the end of the day. So, people and money. And then, look, I think the policy environment, needs to be a more favorable environment for the future success of our industry. We have too many examples of, policies that are, frankly, unhelpful and could, erode U.S. leadership in biotechnology globally. And hopefully some of those policies can be either, thwarted before they become enacted, or we can find ways of creating a more vibrant biotech community within this country to help the future of our industry succeed.
Yeah, it's really good to hear. A very like a positive kind of outlook of it.
Yeah. It's my mother's gift, the optimism, right, coming out.
In your email signature, you have a quote from George Bernard Shaw: "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." So tell us more about this. Is this your personal motto? Who is this unreasonable man?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when I publicly announced that I was leaving Alnylam by the end of 2021, I got emails from so many friends and colleagues around the industry, and Clyde Meanwell, who's a close friend and collaborator, currently my co-head of the Corsera effort. He sent me an email with that George Bernard Shaw quote in it, and ever since getting it from Clive, I've kept it as my signature email, as part of my signature on my email. And the reason I do that, Jen, is that I believe so strongly that quote captures the essence of what it takes to build a successful company on the frontiers of science and medicine. That you must be unreasonable and persist in trying to change the world to how you see it if you're going to make progress when you're leading that type of effort. And so because of how much it resonates with me personally and reflects on what I think is so important in leadership of building a great company, I've kept it as sort of my acknowledgement to that point. Yeah.
Sounds very inspiring.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I think Shaw, captured it very nicely, very well in those words.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to describe unreasonable. Good perspective of
It is.
Innovators, mavericks.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that the word innovation, which originally has roots back into the Greeks, of course, as all things. I'm Greek. But in Greek the word was kenotomia, and kenotomia literally means cutting new cloth, cutting new things. And and then the word innovatio in Latin, in the late Latin, ultimately became the word for innovation in the English language, and it was always viewed as a negative thing until the Industrial Revolution. Before that, if you were doing something unique and different, and it was viewed as being a negative thing, because how dare you break away from the main path. And so the unreasonable man insists on trying to change the world and persist in trying to change the world and be innovative in that regard, and even if people don't like it.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into something we're really interested in now and want to get your opinion on. Like, AI is catching everything by storm, and there's a lot of excitement. What are you kind of most excited for in terms of applications of AI in biotech?
Well, I mean, look, I think AI is transforming so many things in so many places. I mean, look, there are business processes that are massively enhanced by AI, writing, confidentiality agreements, material transfer agreements, writing press releases, writing, even contracts, complicated contracts can be done with a first draft that's an AI-based draft, and then you can make edits and, make it so much more efficient than the typical way it's been done historically. So those type of applications on business processes are just sort of no-brainers and can be applied out there. But in the scientific side of it, look, I'm excited about how AI can transform every aspect of drug discovery, development, and commercialization even. I mean, on the discovery side, you look at AlphaFold and the ability to predict the structure of proteins so readily, and how that prediction allows you to think about, drugging a given target or the biology of a given target. That's already changing the world. We're not yet at a point where we can, ask an AI chatbot to give us the structure of a drug for some disease out there. It's not quite there yet, and may be decades. Although Dami Hassabis has said it will be a lot sooner, and I hope he's right. But I do think it's going to take a little bit more time. And the reason for it is there's just, it's all language model based, and is the right information out there to help instruct it, is the question. And I think in many cases it's not. In clinical trial aspects of it, I mean, we're using AI at Corsera Health to help us predict people who are otherwise healthy, but those that are at higher risk of developing atherosclerosis later in their life. And we can do that pretty reliably, actually, based on large data sets that are out there, and being able to look at, certain biomarkers or family history or diabetes status or smoking, whatever the case might be. And we can predict people that are at higher risk, elevated risk of developing a heart attack or stroke in 20, 30 years using AI. So that's incredible. And then even on the commercial side, if AI can help us find patients, especially in the rare disease setting, there's so many challenges in developing rare disease medicines, mostly linked to very poor diagnosis rates in patients. And I think AI can be a very powerful tool to take electronic medical records and basically help identify people that have characteristics that might be consistent with a given rare disease. And then you can inform the physician to help them think about that patient in a different way. So there will be applications across the entirety of what we do based on AI, which is really exciting.
Usually we ask our interviewees, like, what's your hobbies?
Well, I love to travel. I love great food. I love spending time, on the beach with my wife and hanging out. But my real hobby is biotech. I mean, I love it. I read Nature and New England Journal, and that's what I take to the beach.
You're reading manuscript while you're in the beach?
Yeah, no, I do, and it's pretty crazy. I mean, I wish I had some other hobby, but this is my hobby.
Okay, basically you answer the last question. Any book, podcast, movie you recommend? It seems like you already told you we should read our manuscript to the newspaper, the Nature science page.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you this much. I am writing a book right now. About leading a biotech, leading a company for the future. So take a look for it in about a year or 6 months or whenever it's finished.
Okay.
But it'll be out there. It's called The Importance of Being Unreasonable.
You're very invisible. Yeah. So any other podcast, a movie you recommend? Yeah.
I love movies for just complete pure entertainment. Podcasts. I would recommend this podcast.
Thank you so much, listener. Please follow us.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's been great to talk to you and get some
great
insights in biotech.
I really enjoy talking to you guys, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and a special thanks to Jennifer Zhang and Yusuf Badi for co-hosting with me. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share it with a colleague or friend who might find it valuable. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season. We'll be back soon with more story and insights. Stay tuned. And see you in 2026.